In this second video, we're going to contrast a design approach to writing and pedagogy as opposed to various traditional transmission approaches. Now let me just characterize quickly what we're contrasting this with. One approach might be to bring the textbook into the classroom, and what the historic function of the textbook was to concentrate information about the world and tell it in a single voice to the students. Now that was something which was very much on about a knowledge transmission process and a knowledge consumption process for the students. Now what we can do now in these environments is actually reconfigure the students as knowledge designers who don't just read the world, they actually write the world. So I want to show some examples of that. But also the other, the textbook was one artifact in this traditional kind of pedagogical setup. The other artifact was the teacher recitation. That was the old word used for it. We might have called them the newer word, the teacher lecture. And one of the funny aspects of this environment is we can reproduce all those old things. We can bring in textbooks which have the same relationship of knowledge and package knowledge in the same ways as print textbooks always have, and so what's the point at one level? It's not a big change. Or we can do something else with our lectures, which is called, we can flip the classroom, which instead of standing in front of the students, we can video it and they can watch it later, but it doesn't change the knowledge relations. So what I want to do in this little example is talk about the ways in which we can build a design-oriented approach to knowledge work in the classroom. Now, here we are back in the community space. So I'm going to talk for a moment about the way in which classroom knowledge and discussion is built in the community space. So this particular page here is a community view of Scholar, not a personal profile view. In a community we have admins, we don't have teachers because who knows, this might be students self-organising, it might be, so we're really trying to talk about knowledge relationships rather than traditional pedagogical relationships, and the community has a number of members. And this here is a filtered down activity stream of just stuff that's happening in this community. In fact, all this stuff comes up in everyone's personal activity stream as well, but that's a clutter of 1,000 things. This is just a filtered down version of the community activity stream only. And over here on the right we have things that we call shares, which happen to be some PDF readings, they might be videos. Symbolically they're peripheral, they're over on the edge, and of course I can view a big list of them if I want to, but the real centre of activity is classroom dialogue and knowledge building. And if I go into any one of these updates, this is just a brief summary now. This is actually an update that I made as the admin. And what I do here is, rather than summarise the world, I curate a whole lot of web links: Darwin's Experience of Schooling, Michael Apple on something, Delpit's Critique of Progressive Education, what Bill Gates thinks about things, and I ask a question where how is it educational innovations can express a full range. So these are authentic things in the world which are being pointed to, which I'm more or less curating. I don't need to summarise the world, I can point to the world because it's deeply interlinked with the web. And then what follows is a classroom discussion where each of the members of my class discusses what's going on. Now this can be live, in person, in the classroom. It can be asynchronous, so that distinction becomes irrelevant between in-person and not in-person. But the important thing is this is like a traditional classroom discussion, but it's also deeply, and see, here's people talking to each other, at Anthony, at Elizabeth, lots of cross dialogue going on, and I can just join the conversation like so. But what's interesting about this is that it actually changes classroom discussion in some really important ways for us as people who teach writing as literacy educators. This is an intermediate space between speaking and writing, and in fact the grammar of writing and the grammar of speaking, they're profoundly different, and just reformulating your thoughts like this is an intermediate space between what writing would be like and what speaking would be like. This itself is a cross between a blog and Twitter. It's Twitter's too constrained, blogs are often too voluminous. It's a little bit of a mixture of both. We've deliberately modulated that way. But when I come to make a comment, I go down the bottom here and I want to add a comment, and I want to start typing my comment like so, I can actually think a little bit longer than I can with oral discourse before I go add comment. Now, the other thing about this is, unlike a normal classroom conversation or conventional oral one, everyone speaks at once. There's just an intensity of flow, which is, a good thing in a lot of ways, but it also means that, it's not just the person who normally speaks who speaks. Everyone speaks. There's a kind of set of mutual obligations about speaking. So the interesting thing is, this is so like classroom discourse and also so unlike it. And what are the powerful affordances which make things, make these interesting writing environments, textual environments, interaction environments. So this is just classroom discourse. What I want to get onto now is look at the more in-depth and extended pieces of writing that students do. And I'm now going to give you the publisher view of what's happening in this space. And this is this same group of students that were working in this space. And I have them not reading chapter 7 of the textbook. I have them writing chapters 1 to 24 of the textbook. So they're all, this was a theoretical work, New Learning in Theory, and this person wrote about instigating activities, differentiated instruction, collaborative learning, participatory culture. They're all writing about different things because they're all going to contribute this back to the class as a class knowledge bank. They're going out, they're researching stuff on the web. We saw the metacognition piece in the previous video. And now, I can see where everybody's up to with these works at any one time. But also, if I go into one of the works, for example, this metacognition work that we were discussing before, I can click on that little icon there and see the last keystroke that anybody typed. And in fact, I know these were the reviewers. In fact, the review was anonymous. I can see their names because I'm the publisher. So all these people have had their access to that single source back there on the server, which is not a document, not a file, and based on their different roles, they've been able to do their work. So when I click on that View Current Version here, I can go into the work itself, see the very last keystroke that particular student has typed. Now, in fact, there have been a number of versions of this work. That was the version that was published, in fact, that we saw before. But I'm going to take us back into the first version because I can show you some interesting social things happening around the design of that work, the collaborative construction of that work in a social writing environment. So what we have here is, in the feedback area, we have a number of feedback tools. The first one's called Reviews, and this is a rubric, which is, if you like, a conventional writing rubric. It's actually a knowledge rubric. How well did we define the concept? What's its relevance? How was it exemplified? I developed this as the person who was the publisher in this community, and we have a whole series of rating levels. Now, if I were to write a review now, which I could, I just drag the slider backwards and forwards. If I want to check what each of those numbers means, the rating levels means, I can do that. And by the way, that gives us good iterative reliability if it's well specified. I can write an explanation and I could submit it. Now, as it turns out, these were the results for this particular version. And 3 people wrote reviews. Again, I can see their names because I'm the publisher. In fact, the setting I put in there was anonymous. And if I look at the first person's comments, look, there's a whole lot of nice, interesting comments. The next person's comments, lots of comments. The next person comments, lots of comments, and so on. So what we get is a lot of feedback going on between the work, around the work, giving and receiving feedback, a very social process. And by the way, we keep a record, we track a record of everything that happens in this process. So let me tell you about some kind of the left and right side discussions going on here. This is the work. These are social conversations around the work. This is cognition. This is metacognition. So it's a play between the two sides of the screen. The second type of feedback we have is annotations. And you can see here, she apologised to her reviewers. She's already talking to the other people with whom she's working in an anticipatory sort of way. She's saying, look, I'm on a cruise and I had to cut and paste it because they were charging me too much for the internet. So as a result, a lot of these broken words because of the way in which it got cut and pasted in. But people were very helpful in pointing them out. And if you go down here, you'll see different people were commenting again on the same source, making little comments. Now, as I say, she just saw it as reviewer 1 or reviewer 2. I can see their names. And in fact, I could add a comment here, or I could have a dialogue backwards and forwards. So annotations is about specifically detailed in-text dialogue around particular comments. And if I go to add a comment now, I can either create an annotation, or I've got to select the valid region, so I'm going to talk about that, and I can either make a comment or I can suggest a change, and I can even code that change. Okay, so this is the second form of commentary. The third form is recommendations. What do you think? Is this prime time, right for prime time? Can it be published? And we also have in here a natural language processing checker, which I won't show you now, which simply makes change suggestions that may be useful for the person. It doesn't say things are right or wrong, but it says, look, here's a synonym, or perhaps you could use an alternative spelling, and so on. So if you like, what we've got here is this very, very social design space where the students are actively building knowledge in a collaborative fashion.